again.
Not that one. Drink.
Before I start the video, as a quick reminder, check out my links down below to help support the channel. I am now in partnership with Baron of Dice. They have some awesome TCG accessories like playmats, deck boxes, and dice. And if you want to level up your setup, it is the perfect way to do so. And if you want to support the channel directly and get some sweet perks, consider joining the Patreon. If you want to get early access to videos or even some deck help, Patreon is where it's at. And so without further ado, let's get back into the video. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin with Jurassic Magic, and in today's video I wanted to make a full deck tech around the new Peter Parker / the Amazing Spider-Man, and there's a lot of reasons why I wanted to do this. First of all, I am a big Spider-Man fan. I've loved him ever since I was a little kid, and seeing it come to life in a Magic the Gathering card is pretty cool. There were a couple toys I loved as a kid. One of them was the Hulk gloves, where I was just punching my brothers in the face, and the other one was the Spider-Man gloves, the ones that have the web slinging fluid that you could just shoot all over the place, and that was honestly a blast as a kid. It made me really feel like I was Spider-Man. And by the way, those are probably my two favorite superheroes, the Hulk and Spider-Man. And of course, I also like some other ones like Ghost Rider. But this is not a video about my favorite characters. This is a video specifically about Spider-Man. So let's get back into it. And I just wanted to give you a summary of what I will be talking about today. First of all, I'll talk about the staples, the things that you will need to achieve success. Later on, I'll talk about some synergy with Spider-Man himself, focusing on tapped creatures to put big creatures in. And then later on, of course, I'm going to talk about what big legendary creatures or legendary spells we want to utilize with Spider-Man, and maybe some combo potential. So without further ado, let's swing into action and talk about Peter Parker / the Amazing Spider-Man. So first things first, let's talk about the commander, Peter Parker himself. For 1 and a white, he's a legendary creature, human scientist hero. When he does enter, you create a 2/1 green spider creature token with reach, and you may pay 1 green, white, and a blue, transform Peter Parker, activate only as a sorcery, and he has a 0/1 body. So this one's pretty straightforward. It just enters with an extra token on the battlefield, but it can be useful for the flip side that I'll talk about in a little bit. But of course, this is very flavorful to the story of Peter Parker. He gets bit by that very spider when he enters the room, and then he transforms himself to become the Amazing Spider-Man. Speaking of which, let's read the other side of him. And also something to note about this card, he does have a mana cost of 1 green, white, and a blue, so if you wanted to, you could cast this as the Amazing Spider-Man. Because it's a modal card, you don't have to first cast Peter Parker to transform him. You could do either side if you want to cast Peter Parker in the early game, or if in the late game, if you wanted to cast the Amazing Spider-Man, you have either option to do so. Of course, Peter Parker will turn into the Amazing Spider-Man, not vice versa. The Amazing Spider-Man won't turn into Peter Parker. So with that out of the way, let's read what this one does. He's a legendary creature, spider human hero, and has vigilance and reach. And he has the ability, each legendary spell you cast that is 1 or more colors has web slinging, green, white, and blue. So web slinging is a cost. You may cast a spell for its web slinging cost if you also return a tapped creature you control to its owner's hand. So in a weird way, this is like ninjutsu. Of course, it's a little bit different because you're casting a creature instead of just putting it directly onto the battlefield. You can get cast triggers from other creatures you're cheating in, which is really nice. So now that we know what Spider-Man and Peter Parker are doing, what is the game plan of the deck? What staples do we want to utilize to help maximize our game plan and bring the potential out to its fullest? So every deck needs 2 things, ramp and card draw. We're going to use some cards like Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 Visits to get a little bit more lands into play. But personally, the best way to ramp in this deck, because it hits 2 birds with 1 stone, is by using mana dorks, because we want to return tapped creatures to our hand and put bigger creatures on the battlefield. Mana dorks are going to be essential. Now dig on this. So you got your classics like Avacyn's Pilgrim, Elvish Mystic, and Llanowar Elves. You can put in some better mana dorks like Noble Hierarch, Birds of Paradise, and Delighted Halfling. All these mana dorks are going to be incredible for the deck because, of course, we tap them for mana and pay for that cost of web slinging and return that mana dork to our hand. Because we're focused on a legendary theme, Delighted Halfling is probably the best mana dork of the deck because they will get uncounterable when we cast those legendary spells. And since it's a cast cost with a web slinging, it'll work with Delighted Halfling. If you want to take it a step further, you could add in some bigger mana dorks like Fabro Elder and Bloom Tender. These are great because they tap for mana, and for each color among permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color. And if we have Spider-Man out on the battlefield, since it has Bant color combination, you could tap for all 3 of those colors with both of these cards, return them to your hand, and put a big creature on the battlefield essentially for free for tapping them. But why stop there only adding mana dorks? Make every creature you control into mana dorks too. You could use Cryptolithrite, Enduring Vitality, and Inga and Azeka. All these cards will help ensure that you can have any creature tap for mana and have them return to your hand and cast another big creature on the battlefield. All these are pretty good. Cryptolithrite is cheap and effective, only at 2 mana. Enduring Vitality is a little bit more expensive at 3 mana, however it's a mana dork itself. But I think Inga and Zeka will probably provide you the best value because all your creatures will have Vigilance and have that tap ability. You could swing in and then tap for a later main phase so that you could play a big giant creature. Plus this will give the added bonus of card draw whenever you cast a creature spell if 3 or more mana from creatures was spent to cast it. So that is an also upside too. So there's going to be plenty of ramp in this deck with mana dorks and things that'll help your creatures tap for mana. Another important thing we need in this deck is card draw. So that's why I thought Toski Bearer Secrets would be excellent in this deck, because whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. That's simple enough. Because this is legendary, it could cost 3 mana potentially to put it onto the battlefield. Also, because we're returning creatures to our hand, we could use a card like Dowerport Mage. Whenever one or more other creatures you control leave the battlefield without dying, you draw a card. This by itself will make all the card draw happen when we return those tapped creatures to our hand, or really any other means but without dying. Another excellent card draw choice would be Reki, the History of Kamigawa, mainly because whenever you play a legendary spell, you draw a card. Since we're playing those legendary spells for the discounted rate of web slinging, this will help provide a decent amount of card draw overall. The same can be really applied for the Great Henge. This is a legendary artifact, so we could actually cast this for the web slinging cost for 3 mana instead of 9 mana. This acts as ramp, tapping down for 2 green mana and adding 2 life. Also, whenever those legendary creatures or other creatures enter the battlefield, as long as they're non-token, you get a draw card and put a +1/+1 counter on them. The Great Henge is doing everything for us and at a discounted rate in the early game. This could provide immense value for us. Another card draw option, just to stay in theme with Spider-Man, is Spider-Man 2099 Miguel O'Hara. This is from the starter bundles, and this is actually pretty good because when it enters, you return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hand. It could be our own creature or an opponent's creature. Most likely you want it to be an opponent's creature, so it's a great bounce effect, and it has the ability whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So every time your creature swing at one opponent, a card draw will happen, but if you swing at 3 different opponents, 3 card draws will happen. So those are some of the card draw options. Another thing to think about is removal. Removal is important in any kind of commander game. One option to consider is Lorna the Third Path. This is great because on the ETB, you destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. That is great to destroy those pesky Great Henges that are not on our side of the battlefield. And not only that, it does have a tap ability. You and target opponent each draw a card. So this will give opponent card draw, but it'll give us card draw, and that makes it extra useful because it'll be tapped on the battlefield. We can turn it to our hand, put another big creature on the battlefield, and then recast Lauren for that ETB again. So this is providing a little bit more value compared to a normal removal piece. The same can be applied for Urza's Ruinous Blast, and let me tell you, this is probably the best removal spell you could have in this deck. Exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. This houses a lot of decks, especially token decks. Or really any other deck that's not playing much legendaries, and of course this won't remove your opponent's commanders or some other legendary permanents on the battlefield. However, most likely because you're playing that legendary theme, you're going to be on top more than you're going to be trailing behind compared to your opponents. Another removal piece you may want to consider is desynchronization, because you return each non-land permanence that is not historic to its owner's hand. So artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic, so because we have a lot of legendaries on the battlefield, we don't necessarily have to worry about this compared to our opponents. Also, something else to consider is protection for your creatures, especially your commander, because it might be a removal threat on the battlefield. You could use Lightning Greaves. It's a classic example that will give Shroud to any creature that it's attached to. But we could go a little bit deeper by talking about some other creatures like Skrelv, Defector Might. This is absolutely perfect for the deck because it has that tap ability, choose a color, another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until in a turn, and it can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn too. So this is a tap ability. We could tap it, get protection to one other creature on the battlefield, and not only that, we can return it to our hand and put a bigger creature on the battlefield too. So this is giving us extra points as far as utility goes. Another card that will help our tapped creatures is the Wandering Rescuer. This is perfect for the deck because other tapped creatures you control have hexproof. There's nothing worse than your creatures getting removed right before you're going to cast a big giant creature. Why not give those tapped creatures hexproof so that they evade that targeted removal, and then you could just fly in and get your big creature on the battlefield. Another way we can protect our creatures is by using Spectacular Spider-Man. This is 2 mana and it has flash, so you could cast this on your opponent's turn when they cast a board wipe, and you could sacrifice him for 1 mana. Creatures your opponents control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Of course, this is the heroic sacrifice of Spider-Man, saving the day for the rest of the creatures to live on.
You know how much I sacrificed?
This is basically just a heroic intervention stapled onto a creature, which can be repeatable, which is extra useful if we have some reanimation strategies. I know it took a little while to talk about the staples, but I just wanted to talk about the synergy between the staples and our commander, but I wanted to dive even further into synergy with our commander with a lot of different cards. First up is the new Edge of Eternity's mechanics with Station. Station is a great ability to help our creatures tap so that we can return them to our hand and cast a bigger creature for that Bant color cost. 2 cards that I thought about is the Sarima and Avendo, the Waking Haven. Each of these are perfect for the deck because tapping our creatures is going to be an upside to cast other creatures for a reduced cost. The Sarima is a great option because when it enters, you search your library for a legendary creature card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle. And it has another ability, other tapped legendary creatures you control have indestructible. This is kind of like the Wandering Rescuer. Instead of hexproof, it will have indestructible. And of course, if we have both of these down together, it's just a heroic intervention for all our tapped creatures forever now on. I also love Avendo because it's basically just a Gaia's Cradle. We can tap our creatures, again, kind of same kind of thing, return them to our hand and put a bigger creature on the battlefield and maybe station it again. So I do believe Station is going to be very good with the Spider-Man. You could also use vehicles, but I think Station's a little bit better in my opinion. Like the Sarima is really good with Spider-Man with a synergy. You could just return it back to its hand when it's a creature because it will be tapped when you swing in with it. And then you could recast it to search your library for another legendary creature. Kind of go back and forth with that. So the Station mechanic is going to be very good with this commander overall, mainly because of tapping creatures, because usually it's a downside, but it's going to be an upside for our kind of deck. I also wanted to focus on the legendary theme a little bit more. I wanted to focus on cards like Raph, Capshin, Ship's Mage, and Gandalf the White. Both of these are incredible for the deck because they have flash, and because that web slinging cost is a cast ability. You can cast these at flash speed as long as you have a tap creature for Bant color combination. And if they're on the battlefield, that means you can cast any historic or legendary or artifact spells as though they had flash, and Gandalf is a little better at this because if a legendary permanent or artifact entering or leaving the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So it's like legendary Panharmonicon, but better.
Fool of a took.
Both of these will help in the situations where somebody tries to remove a creature on the battlefield that's tapped. We could just use that mana to put it back to our hand and put a big creature on the battlefield, or really any other legendary spell. If we wanted to cast a Urza's Ruinous Blast at flash speed, we could easily do that too with Gandalf the White because you can cast legendary spells. It's not just reduced only to legendary creatures, any legendary spell. Another card that will help double up triggers is the Sixth Doctor. This is going to be very good for the deck because it's legendary. We could cast it for that Bant color combination if we have a tapped creature. But not only that, it has a very important line of text. Whenever you cast a historic spell, you copy it. Except the copy isn't legendary. This ability triggers only once each turn. This is going to be huge because if you have this on the battlefield, why stop at 1 Elesh Norn when you have 2 Elesh Norns on the battlefield, 1 legendary and 1 non-legendary? That could be even more impactful. And speaking of which, what are the best cards we could cheat in? I already mentioned one with Elesh Norn, Grand Cenobite. This is absolutely a backbreaker. Other creatures you control get +2/+2, and creatures your opponents control get -2/-2. This is such a mean card along with the other Praetors. Jin-Gitaxias you could actually just flash in for 3 mana instead of that hefty mana cost. Making each opponent's maximum hand size reduced by 7 is just rubbing salt in the wound. But of course we get the great card draw at the beginning of our end sub, drawing 7 cards. So it's a win more for us, but a lose more for our opponents with each of these Praetors. I didn't put Jin-Gitaxias or Vorinclex into this deck list because they are game changers and a little salt inducing, so I didn't put them in the list.
Don't ever be ashamed of who you are.
I'm not ashamed of who I am.
But just because I didn't put those in the list doesn't mean I didn't put any other big creatures that are scary in the list too.
Stings, doesn't it?
A card like Koma the Cosmos Serpent is possibly one of the best cards you could throw in this list for many reasons. For one, it can't be countered, so people can't interact with it when it is on the stack unless they have like a exile target spell effect. However, there's a lot of uses with this card. For one, it makes a 3/3 blue serpent creature token named Koma's Coil at the beginning of each upkeep, and it has has two different abilities, sacrifice another serpent, choose one, tap target permanent, its activated abilities can't be activated this turn, or Coma the Cosmos Serpent gains indestructible until end of turn. I actually like it for that first ability more than the second ability, not just for our opponent's creatures, but for our own, just in case if there's a situation where you don't have any way of tapping your creatures down to put a big giant creature on the battlefield. All you have to do is sacrifice a Coma's Coil, tap down one of your creatures, pay for that web slinging cost, and put another creature on the battlefield. So Coma has a lot more uses in this deck than any other deck in my opinion. Another card, or should I say cards that are going to be busted in this deck, is Avacyn, Angel of Hope, and you could also throw in Avacyn's Memorial because it is a legendary artifact with colored mana. You could also cast this because it's a legendary spell with Spider-Man's web slinging cost, but essentially these have indestructible and other legendary permanents you control have indestructible. These are going to be great for the deck. Avacyn is a little better of course because other permanents you control have indestructible rather than just legendary permanents, but either way these are on the battlefield. Most likely you're going to be winning the game. I also like cards like the Tarrasque and Kogla the Titan Ape, mainly because they fight different creatures on the battlefield. With the Tarrasque, as long as it was cast, it has haste and ward 10, and when it does attack, it fights up to target creature defending player controls. And with Kogla the Titan Ape, when it enters the battlefield, it fights up to one other target creature you don't control, and whenever he does attack, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. And the sneaky good part about this card, because our commander is a human, you may pay 1 and a green, return target creature that is a human you control to its owner's hand. Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn. This is perfect because we can return Peter Parker or the Amazing Spider-Man to our hand and then play it on a later turn if it was targeted by removal. Because there is a lot of ETBs, you may as well include Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. This is another version of Elish Norn that works perfectly for this deck. It's a Panharmonicon for creatures we control that enter, and really any other permanent, and it shuts down our opponent's ETBs too, so it is a win more for us and lose more for our opponents. If you do want to go into the more card draw route, you could use Nezahal Primal Tide. I like this card a lot because it's basically just a Mystic Remora on a stick. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you draw a card, and it can protect itself, discarding 3 cards, exiling it, and returning back to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next end step. Plus, what's nice about it has the extra abilities of this spell can't be countered, and you have no maximum hand size too, so that is also an added bonus. You could also throw in some dragons like Dragon Lord Dramoka or even Old Gnawbone. Dragon Lord Dramoka is essentially a Grand Abolisher on the battlefield that's a little bit more beefed up, and the spell can't be countered too. There's a lot of cards like Nezahal and Coma that can't be countered, but this is perfect because nobody could interact with you on your turn. That is huge because we could get into some big shenanigans. I also like Old Gnawbone because it could provide us some extra mana when we swing in with creatures, dealing combat damage, getting that much treasure tokens. But let's get back to dinosaurs because that's really what my channel is known for. Galta and Maverin is a perfect card for this deck. Whenever you attack, you choose one. You create a tapped and attacking XX green dinosaur creature token with trample, where X is the greatest power among other attacking creatures. Or you have the other option to create X11 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is the number of other attacking creatures. This one actually might be more useful than making the dinosaur token, because if you're making a lot of tokens on the battlefield that you could tap, the more creatures that you can cheat in. But let's move on to another version of Galta with Galta Stampede Tyrant. This is a very good version of Galta because that is a great ETB. Put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. All those creatures that we tapped to put into our hand will re-enter the battlefield, and maybe some other big creatures that we were saving for a later time. Galta is easily one of the best cards you could throw on this list because of cheating in creatures. Plus, not only that, you could swing in with Galta, put it back to your hand, and then recast it later with another tapped creature, putting it back to your hand too, and then getting that ETB all over again. However, I did save the best for last, and this one might be a controversial one to put in this list, but I think it's going to be very good for the list in my opinion, and that would be none other than Anti-Venom Horrifying Healer. And look, I understand it has 5 white pips, it's going to be very hard to cast. However, if you have Spider-Man out on the battlefield and a tapped creature, instead of paying the 5 white pips, all you're really going to be paying is Bant color combination to cast this card, and when you do cast it, you return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and he has another ability. If a damage would be dealt to Anti-Venom, prevent that damage and put that many 1/1 counters on him, and he has a 5/5 body. So for one, this is a great reanimation piece. If there's a creature in a graveyard, we could just cast this and put that other creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. So this can be useful as a one-time effect. However, you can make this repeatable. If you swing in with Anti-Venom, or if you have any other way of tapping him, you can return him to your hand and put another creature on the battlefield, and then recast him for that same web slinging cost of Bant color combination to return another creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. And this is essentially kind of repeatable, and this could apply for really any card that has an ETB or a cast trigger, you could return those cards to your hand and then recast them for the web slinging cost. So that's why I personally like Anti-Venom Horrifying Healer, is the fact that we could reuse that ability over and over again, maybe even one single turn. But now that is going to do it for me. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Peter Parker / The Amazing Spider-Man. Again, this is a very powerful commander. The more I brewed around it, the more I realized how powerful this can be. There's probably a lot of other synergies that I didn't think about. Let me know down below in the comments, what do you think? What other cards can utilize Spider-Man to the fullest? I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. And again, there's going to be a lot of other spoilers that come out for Spider-Man that can be in this list too. And if you're watching this from the future, let me know down below in the comments what cards from this set work perfectly with him. Again, this is on the early stages of spoilers with the new Spider-Man set, so not all the cards have been spoiled for me to talk about them in this list. I'm just very excited to talk about Spider-Man and a lot of the different cards within the set. Is there any other commanders you'd like to see me make a video about? Again, I know I'm asking a lot of different questions, so if you pick one and comment down below, that'd be much appreciated. And I just hope that there's going to be a 3-color Venom, kind of like all these other flip cards. Eddie Brock on the front and then Venom on the back would be a match made in heaven. I just hope that happens and it's interesting, because I'm definitely all over that. Anyways, getting sidetracked, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.